It's the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. Hello, New Jersey football fans, and welcome to episode 2 of the Jersey Blitz. I'm Dan Long, and on today's episode, I'll be joined by Ryan Patti, Donovan Hugel, and Bill Evans, as we're going to be breaking down everything that happened from Week 0 action that kicked off the 2025 New Jersey football season. That'll be a looking at Bergen Catholic and Don Bosco's big out-of-state wins, looking at Winslow's performance at the Battle of the Beach, as well as talking about some of the big wins secured by some of the powers down the Jersey Shore. We'll also look at St. Peter's Prep's victory at home in Hudson County against Paramus Catholic, as well as breaking down our top 20 and giving us all the analysis or our guys around the horn. And starting things off here, taking a look at the top 2 teams in our NJ.com top 20. It's Ryan Patti as we welcome him onto the show. Ryan, Bergen Catholic, somehow, some way, the Crusaders found a way to once again come away with a thrilling victory against East St. Louis, a team that in one of the preseason polls was right there with the Crusaders in top 10 in the nation. And is this just another feather in the cap for Vito Campanelli and his Crusaders? Where do you rank this in the midst of their run of utter dominance?
Yeah, Dan, I think this is right up there. Maybe one of their best wins in the past 4 years, now 5 years, going on 5. This win's enormous, and it's enormous for the psyche of this team. You know, it's predominantly the same team as last year. You do lose Dom Campanelli, you lose Quincy Porter, a couple pieces up front, and then the front 7. Naeem Parrish is also gone, but you didn't know how it was going to go on Thursday. You know, the talent's there and stuff like that, but you didn't know how all the pieces lined up. And they showed they still got it. I mean, that clutch gene is still there. You know, for Jordan Thomas to do the things he did in this game, after going up 14-0 and then giving up 21 unanswered, you know, 7 of those points came on a botched field goal snap, which I've never seen happen to Bergen. It was a fluke play. Even in week 0, I've never seen them do something like that. But this sets the tone for the rest of the season. You know, it's a we're still on top kind of game. And, you know, not to mention they haven't had the best luck out of state. I'm not going to say what team, but they're trying to get the past couple years, they've been trying to get a team from out of state on the schedule. And that team, they haven't been able to get them on the schedule. Last year, they gave up a lead against IMG. They were leading in the third quarter. They kind of gave that game away, got out physical there in that fourth quarter. And we know how much they learned from that game against Chaminade Madonna in Florida a few years ago. But, you know, I'm sure they didn't like Jeremiah Smith running circles around them for 4 quarters. So this Bergen team was kind of scratching and clawing for a win against a national power. And they got it on Thursday. And it was one of the better games I've ever covered. And, you know, maybe an early candidate for game of the year.
Ryan, BC and their run of dominance that we've talked about over the last couple of seasons together, they're used to obviously getting out to an early lead and being able to have that staying power. Well, they did the same thing against East St. Louis, but talk a bit about the resiliency that the Crusaders had to show that, yeah, it's not the easiest thing in the world to lead and then have to hold on to the lead, but to get punched over and over again and then have to trail and come from behind, and then a gutsy call by Vito Campanelli, not settling for tying it up at 21-all, but he wanted to go for the win. What does this say about Bergen Catholic showing their resilience with a very young core? There's a lot of sophomores in that starting lineup already.
Yeah, it almost reminded me of the semifinal last year against St. Joe's, where they had to answer a couple punches and kind of get up off the mat. And they did, and they came back and won the game in overtime. What I feel like I learned on Thursdays, first off, they have a quarterback. They actually have 2 quarterbacks. And the saying goes, when you have 2, you have none. But Vito, once again, has figured out a way to have a 2 quarterback system. You know, Trey Tagliaferri has a great arm. He proved he could throw downfield. He can fit it into the right spots. And he also showed that he can rely on his offensive line and, you know, stand in the pocket and trust his guys to pick up their assignments. And then Walker Sneed, they mixed in, and he was picking up chunk runs. He had an 18-yard run. And he's a physical kid for a freshman. He's built like a linebacker, and he's going to be fun to watch these next couple of years. Second of all, Jackson Vaughn has a chance to be the best edge rusher that I think we've seen since Rashawn Gary, and I don't think I'm exaggerating. This kid, like one of the first plays of the game, spun off in East St. Louis, spun off their left tackle and right into a sack. It was on the first defensive possession for them, and then he had two more sacks, another tackle for loss. He's the most disruptive player I've seen in a long time, and we're just a few games in his career, and he had four sacks in the state final. But I didn't really get the chance to watch him up close. I wasn't keying in on him. I keyed in on him on Thursday, and holy cow, he's good. And this defense as a whole is good. And they did get pushed around a bit in this game, especially in the second and third quarter. But I'm not sure they're going to play a team as physical and sizable, Dan, as East St. Louis was. And um, I just think this defense is going to go to work really, really every week this year.
And no rest for the weary. Bergen Catholic, they're going to be traveling on the road to Florida to take on West Boca, another national powerhouse. So we'll see how Bergen Catholic stacks up in their second game. But if we're going to talk about resilience, Donovan, then we have to go to the Lone Star State and Don Bosco Prep, our number 2 team. They were facing a 10-point deficit at halftime. They hunkered down. They rallied from behind, and they came away with a win in Texas. What is that result like for Don Bosco Prep and Coach Sabella?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of big wins for Bosco outside of a season opening win over Bergen, like I couldn't think of a bigger win to start a season than you travel on the road to an as intimidating of an environment as possible as Texas. There's 3,500, 4,000 people in that arena. They can see it from a mile away. Their opponent, Melissa, didn't even warm up on the field. Bosco was on the field by themselves for warms because Melissa was warming up in their own indoor facility at the field. So I mean, when you take into account all of that, it's a huge win. And I mean, they've won a lot of big games throughout the years, but this is one of the biggest, especially to start a year. There's obviously things they want to clean up. I mean, like you said, they were down 10-0 at halftime. They had to rally. They needed to change at quarterback, which I'm sure we'll talk about. There were some mistakes on special teams. Obviously, that you're probably bound to have mistakes on special teams in week 0 and weeks 1. How can they jumpstart that offense earlier? They didn't get as much out of Dante DeLuca, but I'm sure, up against a tough opponent like that, he'll heat up throughout the course of a season. But I think one thing we learned about them is that their defense travels, and in this sport, defense travels more than in any other sport. And whether it's a flight away to Texas or a 10 to 15-minute drive down to St. Joe's, their defense looks like it's going to continue to be a big tone setter for them. The only question right now is the quarterback.
And as you were hinting at, and of course, it's the nature of our job, we have this luxury of playing a little Monday morning quarterback. Is there a quarterback controversy now developing in Ramsey with Don Bosco Prep and a very famous last name for this winning quarterback in the second half of their win down in Texas?
I mean, you can't ignore it. I think we hinted at it on the podcast last week that the only question that Ryan and I had talked about for Don Bosco coming into the season was the quarterback. And it was Dylan Rona. He was the incumbent starter. He was the backup last year. Played well in the appearances that he had, but he hadn't played over the course of an entire season. He gets the start against Melissa. Obviously, they would have liked more from him. He was 5 of 16 for 43 yards and an interception, but you also have to take into account the opponent that they played. They traveled to Texas. That's a really tough opponent. And then out of nowhere, Carson Shane comes in, son of Giants GM Joe Shane, and he finishes 5 of 6 for 114 yards, a passing touchdown, a rushing touchdown. He accounted for both of their touchdowns in the second half. I mean, it's hard to ignore that there might be some sort of quarterback controversy. I could definitely see a world where Shane gets the start on Friday, but at the same time, I could also see a world where they also haven't made that decision yet, and they could start Rona at the same time. The fact of the matter, Rona has more experience in these games. He was the backup last year. Played against Bergen. He played really well against DePaul last year, put up solid numbers in both games. But Carson Shane, he's right on his tails. He's right on his tails. He played a great game. I wouldn't overreact to one game. It's such a small sample size, but everything's going to be answered shortly when they host Monarch from Florida, which is another big football state. It's going to be another really good opponent for them. Who's going to be under center, who's going to step up, and who's going to try to get them to 2-0.
And Donovan, how much psychologically does this play a part for Don Bosco, who in the last couple of years, they kind of build up their steam as the season goes along, but they've been mired in slow starts to finally finish and get that win rallying from behind? How much do you think that will play a part in what Coach Sabella is trying to sell to his team of we're as good as anybody, if not the best team in New Jersey?
I think it's huge. I think you could see it. There was a video afterwards of how animated and how emotional Sabella was. after that game, telling them how great of a start this was. This really was a true start. And like I said, outside of a win over Bergen, which I don't see a world in which those two schedule each other to start a year. But, a win where you travel all the way down to Texas. Texas is one of the premier football. It's arguably the premier football state in the entire country. They produce so many five-star players. They produce so many NFL and college players. And like you said, Bosco has been mired in slow starts, and this is a signal. This is a key for them that we're not going to be messed around with this year. This is the start that we're going to look forward to try and stop Bergen's reign of non-public A titles. Those two are dead rivals. They don't like each other. That game in a few weeks is going to be a lot of fun. But I'm sure this win is going to give them a lot of momentum going forward, no matter who is starting at quarterback for them.
So the two top teams in New Jersey fare well out of state, winning in the Battle of the Beach against Illinois' best, and then winning down in Texas. And Bill Evans, our number 3 team, they went toe-to-toe with one of the nation's best programs in IMG. What did you learn about Winslow in that performance under the bright lights as the marquee game in that whole affair, that they could hold their heads high? They didn't come away with a win, but the number 3 team at the top public school, they really made a name for themselves.
Yeah, I think they showed that they're as good as we thought they were, and maybe even better. I think that Winslow got everything they wanted out of that game, other than the win. That they're down 21-0. At the end of the first quarter, and at that point looked like look, this could be a 56-7 game. They're maybe not ready for this stage, and then they just the last 3 quarters were dead even, and it wasn't like a situation where they fell behind 35-0 and scored late. They fought their way back into that game. They got it to 21-14 at the half. Jalen Parker, on a 4th down run, flipped into the end zone after taking a hit. It's a close game. It's still a 1-score game late in the 3rd quarter, and quite honestly, just nothing. No, none of the bounces went their way. First drive, IMG scores. Winslow came all the way right back down and got down to the 15-yard line. Receiver caught the ball and took a big hit, and the ball popped in the air, and IMG defensive back just kind of ran right under it and went 85 yards. I mean, that ball could have, landed on the ground. Maybe it's called an incomplete pass. Maybe Winslow recovers. Maybe it goes out of bounds. It went to the, IMG defensive player, and now it's 14-0 instead of, potentially 7-7. IMG had a botched handoff. Running back had no idea where it was. Quarterback was able to get to it before the defense did. And then, the last, when it's 28-14 with about 5 minutes to go, another tipped ball, IMG ends up picking it off. They score on the next play. So, a couple of those bounces go another way, and maybe it's a 1-score game, and Winslow's got the ball at the end. You never know. But I said last week, I kind of worried about the size differential. IMG ran the ball pretty well, but I did not sense that Winslow was getting bullied. Thought they stood up to them in the trenches. I thought skill for skill that they were right there with them. And for a team that really has never played on this type of stage before, and again, IMG playing their 3rd game, Winslow playing their 1st. I thought that Winslow had a great accounting of themselves and showed that they're a team that, if they're not on the national level now, they are definitely heading in that direction.
Bill, for a team that went undefeated a season ago, what do you think they take away from this loss? They're not the type of team that's playing for moral victories. They believed, as you were saying with Coach Belton, that they're there to win, and they're going to beat Bergen Catholic in a couple of weeks as well and show they're the New Jersey's top-ranked team. What do you think they take away from that experience against IMG that you think can pay dividends maybe against the Bergen Catholic in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, well, now they've seen that level of competition, and I think that they now know that they can compete with Bergen Catholic. I don't know that they doubted it before, but I think this gives them a little more, assurance that they're at that level. And if they come out and, they play, the way that they know that they can, and they don't make, some of the mistakes. I mean, again, they played a pretty good game, but, there were some penalties there, a couple turnovers that, if they can clean that up, they're right there with the best of them. And I think also what they learned is, their players individually are good enough. Jalen Parker was a 1st-team All-State quarterback last year, but he's a junior who's a 5'10" pocket passer that actually showed he could get out of the pocket and run a little bit. Because of his size, he came into the season without an offer. IMG's quarterback Jaden Wade is one of the best, prospects in the country. He's got offers from Ohio State and Oregon and Texas. You watch the two of them play, and Jaden Wade played well. Jalen Parker matched him, I thought. I mean, he was just as good. I thought Nakeem Powell and TJ Maddox were a couple other players that really stepped up, and they showed that they have players that can play, are just as good as some of the best players in the country. So I think it gives them a little confidence. I think it gives them, a little bit of momentum, despite the loss going into that Bergen Catholic game in a few weeks, and now that they've seen that level, they're going to be at home, and I think it's going to draw a lot more attention, and I think that they're going to come out ready and knowing that they can win that game.
And also, Bill, do you feel like from this type of results that Winslow had, is that going to spur an interest in maybe other teams from South Jersey in the future? Maybe not necessarily challenging themselves against the likes of an IMG, but to try out an opportunity to play someone that's maybe not in their normal comfort zone?
I would hope so. And, Winslow was a little bit, a little bit of maybe a different situation this year. And we talked again last week about how deep South Jersey is, but Winslow is certainly at a higher level than anybody else in South Jersey. I mean, I believe that, but I think that if you get to that level, Rancocas Valley is a team that's on the way up. We've talked about Glassboro even being a Group 1 with some of the players that they have. I would hope that, and public schools in general, really. I mean, because again, a lot of times when we see these games, it's one of the top non-publics. Can a public school actually compete with a team that's top 10 in the country? Well, now we know if you're good enough, you can. And I think this will generate some more interest maybe for some other teams that maybe, especially with the Battle of the Beach, they're always looking, the organizers are always looking for these types of matchups. They might not have to go and play a game in Texas. They can play a game in their backyard against a top team. And I think the organizers will look for more games like that. I definitely think Winslow is going to next year. They're still going to be great. I think they're going to continue to look to schedule these kind of games, and I hope that maybe an RV or a Glassboro or somebody like that kind of takes a crack at some of these teams down the road.
On Thursday, I had the honor of going down the shore to kick off our broadcast coverage for NJ.com, and we covered Toms River North's game against Red Bank Catholic. I wasn't necessarily surprised, guys, that Red Bank Catholic won that game and snapped the 19-game win streak for Toms River North. But Ryan, were you shocked at how kind of emphatically they did it and how they did it with an incredible bunch of freshmen? That was the thing that blew me away. They are stocked, Red Bank Catholic, for years to come at quarterback, at running back, even at kicker, all with the class of 2029 leading the way. They led to a 21-0 win against Toms River North, snapping that 19-game win streak. Were you surprised at how emphatically they did that in beating Toms River North?
Yeah, this is a big deal for RBC, Dan. And, they end a 19-game win streak here and take it to a Toms River North team that really hasn't, dealt with something like that or seen something like that, been beaten like that in a long time. And like you mentioned, it was the freshmen, two freshmen, Ramir Rivera, the quarterback. He threw a pair of scores, and then Gabe Kemp, the running back, ran for a touchdown and 119 yards. Last year was a lean year for the Caseys. I mean, they had an experienced quarterback in Frankie Williams. He was a very good game manager for them, valued the football, didn't turn it over a whole lot. But they went 6-4, and they lost to St. John Vianney in the first round of the playoffs. And that was when they had Abdul Toure, who we'll talk about later this episode. But that's not the standard at all for Red Bank. And they win a game like this, 21-0. It's kind of, who's the best team in the shore, stuff like that. All those narratives are out there. And you can kind of see the sky's the limit for this team with these young kids leading the way. And I know Coach Lang, going back to my Rivals days, and it's better for New Jersey when his teams are good because there's so much passion around that program, around shore conference football. He gets so fired up when they're good. And, they have 2 state titles in the past 4 years, and they've been to 3. So, they've taken out some really talented DePaul teams, and, they've proved they're a legit program, and they get a great crop of kids. And they're fighting for kids all over the shore because there's Donovan Catholic. Some of those shore programs are very good. Toms River North being one of them. So there's a lot of great programs. And a lot of kids want to go play for Coach Lang. So, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but you see these freshmen, these underclassmen, this is a glimpse of what could be, the next couple of years for RBC.
It was electric to see Kemp and Rivera just really going up and down the field and thinking, my goodness, they're 14 years old. This is going to be the core nucleus of this team going forward. And then on the other side, you had a youth movement as well for Toms River North, Ryan, but the struggles. They don't have the luxury of having a two-time reigning player of the year in New Jersey in Micah Ford. Even TJ Valerio was outstanding, slinging it all around the field. A team that predicated its offense as its specialty, they struggled and did not even score any points. What is now the future for Toms River North as they've kind of come back to reality a bit after, again, we're not saying it's the end of the season, but a team that went 40-2 in their last 42 games before that opener last Thursday.
Yeah, I think it's not time to push the panic button for TRN, but especially, you mentioned all those new pieces and stuff like that. And Joe said it, I think he said on the last episode, Coach Oz thinks that his team will peak later in the year. I believe he said, you better get us now if you're going to get us. So, there's no Jaylene Matthews, there's no Mordecai Ford, Cam Thomas. There's a lot of different pieces here that need to just be figured out. And I think they will, even against a tough short conference schedule. Even, when the playoffs come around, because TRN will be there, Group 5 is very tough. You got the townships, the RVs, and all those guys. So it's going to take some time, but I believe they will get there, and they'll very much be in the mix. But I'll say this one, more thing about RBC. I think that this unlocks them. At the very least, they're the team to beat in the short conference now, and I think they also have a chance in non-public B to make some noise. And we're still very early in the season. But when the king gets knocked out of its throne, it's usually the team who beats them that takes the spot. And like I said, a lot more time to go in the season. We know how good Rumson is. We'll talk about them in a minute. We know how good Brick Memorial is. We'll talk about them as well. But right now, I think with TRN taking the loss that they did, I think RBC is the one sitting in that throne right now.
I was about to say, nice segue there, Ryan. And Donovan, you have the arch rivals of Red Bank Catholic in Rumson Fairhaven who are trying to say, hey, wait a second here. We might be the goods this year in the short conference. And they certainly showed off that way in their season opener.
Yeah, I mean, think about all the questions that we had about Rumson coming into the year, coming off that Group 2 title. Can that new quarterback shine? Seemingly, it was Casey Moore. He won the job at a camp. Will they be more one-dimensional? Will there be growing pains? I mean, they graduated 8 first-team all-short players. That's daunting for a team like that. But I mean, they crushed Point Pleasant Borough 34-0, and there seemingly is not a lot of questions now after that. And like Joe wrote in his story, there is not one solution to their QB issue of replacing Owen O'Toole last year. There's two. We have Casey Moore, who, like I said, seemingly won the job at a camp, more of a passer, and then he's a junior, and then we have sophomore Brady Williams, and they were dominant. They accounted for 6 touchdowns. It's quite the switch up after the pass-heavy O'Toole that they had at their disposal last 3 years, but it's also very smart given their personnel. Both quarterbacks are inexperienced. Why not allow both of them to get their feet wet while they get more comfortable? But they both exceeded expectations just in one game, and they have Rumson looking like an extremely exciting team once again in the short in Group 2. Williams, more dual threat, 6'3", 205, but also surprised 56 passing yards and 2 touchdowns and a lot of damage with his arm compared to his legs. And then Moore, 6', 175, as Joe put, he's the runt of the QB litter. More comfortable as a passer, but I mean, he also completed over 10 yards per pass, 96 yards, a touchdown on 6 completions. And then you add into that the performance of Kellen Murray, who had 100 yards on the ground, didn't get in the end zone, but that's a lot of yards between 3 people, and that's a lot for a defense to handle. And in future weeks, you're now asking opposing defenses to prepare for a passing QB, a dual threat QB, and a very strong quarterback. And it looked like, it looked like Williams was able to pass and do more with his legs. So add that into his game as well. They can do so much on offense, and it's going to be very daunting for opposing defenses to have to deal with that in future weeks.
So we talk about RBC's dominant performance. Obviously, Rumson Fairhaven dominant as well. And What about Brick Memorial, Donovan? They go out and they win, even without the services of their starting quarterback. Again, this is the team that many believe on paper might be the best team in the Shore Conference this year.
I mean, without a doubt, Brick is one of the most intriguing stories out of week 0 in all of New Jersey. QB Jason Lahara is out with an illness. We don't know how long he's going to be out. In steps Trey Talmadge, who we all know about as a 4-year starting linebacker for them. He hadn't played. He had 242 career tackles, additional 363 career receiving yards as a tight end, but he had never played quarterback. And then he comes in and he's asked to start a quarterback with Lahara out. And it's an unbelievable way to start the year. I mean, he started off a little slow, but then he heated up towards the end. He was 9 of 14, 213 yards, 2 touchdowns, 71-yard throw to Nazir Matthews in the second quarter, 77-yard throw to Ricky Dillon in the third quarter, and he also led the team in rushing yards with 98 yards and 2 touchdowns. Usual stuff on defense. I mean, he's one of the best defensive players in the Shore Conference. 10 tackles with an interception. Just an absolutely incredible way, a dream way for him to start the season. Now, I mean, Walt Curry over at Brick, their head coach, would he love for Lahara to be back when they play Rumson next week? Absolutely. You want Talmadge playing in his usual positions of linebacker and tight end. But it would also be very entertaining to see him play quarterback and potentially do this again in a big game against Rumson.
Ryan, shifting scenes, getting back up north this time, going to Hudson County. When these two teams match up with one another, it's fireworks offensively. I'm talking about St. Peter's Prep, Paramus Catholic. They've had some barn burners to start off the season the last couple of years. And this time around, it was St. Peter's Prep who had the last laugh against the Paladins. How big of a win is this win for St. Peter's Prep? And what do you make of their performance at Caven Point?
Yeah, Dan, it was the defense and the ground game for them this time. I mean, it was huge defense in the fourth quarter that got it done. But I'll start with the ground game. Abdul Toure, I mentioned him earlier, St. John Vianney transfer. He's a junior 4-star recruit, had a big game, and so did his teammate in senior Tyler Barksdale, who we got glimpses of last year, but not, an effort like this. He had 90 yards and 2 scores. Abdul Toure, 170 yards. They combined for 263 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, just a heck of a day on the ground for them. I can't remember the last time they've had a guy like Toure. He's probably their best running threat since Brandon Wimbush. Maybe I'm missing a running back, but they haven't had a running back that could just take over a game like this. And Barksdale showed you that he could do it too. Behind this offensive line, they have a lot of size up front, and these are pretty big elements for this team because it takes a lot of pressure off Tyler Bell, who, in my opinion, was kind of maybe leaned on a little bit too much last year. They asked of him too much. Really the past 2 years as he started as a sophomore. But yeah, this ground game is difference making for them this year. And the defense, Dan, I can't tell you how many track meets I've seen this team in, over the last few years. Like they score and you're like, all right, like they're going to pull away here. And then they give up like 2 straight touchdowns and the defense just completely derails them. But that fourth quarter, like I talked about, they got to stop inside their own 10. They forced a 3 and out that turned into a bad punt snap and sent them up inside the 5. Then they recovered a fumble and picked off a pass. So pretty much 4 takeaways, quote unquote, in the fourth quarter. That's a breath of fresh air. I mean, that's special for a team that you really haven't seen that from the past couple of years. They lost many games last year, including, to Paramus Catholic in the season opener because of defense. And maybe, just maybe, it could be a reason why they win games this year.
Now, as we've always been talking about, you don't want to freak out after one game and you don't want to go crazy. But does this prove that maybe St. Peter's Prep can return to being one of those top teams that can challenge for a non-public A title in a loaded bracket, to say the least? But it's not that far long ago where St. Peter's Prep was seen as that team always jockeying with Greg Toll's Ironmen as being the team at the end and maybe winning a championship here or there. It wasn't even BC in the picture at that point. Is St. Peter's Prep moving closer and closer to being back in that upper echelon?
I'm not ready to say so just yet. Like, I'm not ready to talk state title yet. I think they're still a tier below, the top teams in the state, but this defense was good late. I've just got to see it from the first quarter to the fourth quarter, and it might take some time for that to happen. They lack some experience in spots, a lot of first-time starters, and that's what Coach Hansen talked about. They gave up a couple touchdowns in a hurry on Friday, And then they settled in, and Coach Hanson's like, yeah, all they had to do was just settle in and relax and hunker down. And they did. Um, offensively at quarterback, Tyler Bell. I love Tyler Bell. Great dual threat quarterback committed to UMass. I think they have someone special in him. They got the two running backs. They have a deep cast of receivers, very good offensive line. I think offensively they could stack up with anyone. But remember, it was the defense and special teams in 2019 that got them their state title against Bosco. Cody Simon running the punt back. They blocked the field goal, and Avery Powell, takes it to the house. Tyre Clark on Friday, very, very much impressed me. Two-way player at receiver and DB, but he's, a special teamer for them. He was dynamic in the return game. Tyler Bell can punt the ball as well, so he can, do some things in the field position game. But I just need to see more of it from the defense to be convinced. And Friday was, a step in the right direction. But I think it's just got to start, next week, going right into it next week and stopping the run against Union City.
And on the other sideline, Ryan, you look at Coach Russo's Paramus Catholic Paladins. He was talking up about how excited he was for this season at Super Football Conference Media Day at MetLife, where the two of us were, and how he wanted his team to show that they have what it takes early on and then build on that momentum, knowing that they play in a gauntlet of a division alongside the likes of Bergen Catholic, Don Bosco, and St. Joe's. What did you learn about Paramus Catholic? And is this a speed bump or is this more of a concern losing to St. Peter's Prep in the opener?
I think it's just a speed bump. They were in this game. They were down 28-26. I believe it was early in the fourth quarter. And I was like, you know what? They might mess around and win this game here. They were driving to take the lead. They got inside the 10, like I mentioned, and St. Peter stopped them consecutive. Well, actually, it was 2nd and 1, and they ran it 3 times in a row and got stopped 3 times. And, the big reason why they didn't convert was because Chukuma Odo rolled his ankle in the first half. I'm not a doctor, but I don't think it's a long-term injury. It seems like something he maybe could have played through, but they're kind of thinking the long term here. I think he's ultimately going to be fine. He'll be back soon. But you learn that Nakai Martin is dynamic at receiver. Achilles DuPont, who we saw a lot of last year when Xavier Williams got hurt, he is a home run hitter. He's a game changer at running back. And we didn't even see AJ Lopez, do much at receiver because of how well those two were playing in DuPont and Martin. So, and Marco Green. I mean, Marco Green looked very, very much mature. He learned a lot from last year, his junior season. This year he's coming in as a senior. He threw the ball very nicely. Took some hits, in the pocket. St. Peter's brought a lot of heat, and he was standing in the pocket and taking hits. He didn't run from any of the pressure, but there's also moments in this game that were fixable. You had the snap that I mentioned on the punt and some tackling miscues. Barksdale and Teray were breaking a lot of tackles. So this Paramus Catholic team, they're going to take their lumps. They'll get Udo healthy, and they'll be fine. They're going to take some lumps at certain points, but and that's kind of just because they're a tier below some of these guys right now. But I'm expecting them to make a run in non-public B. I think they're kind of right there with Red Bank Catholic. I think they're ranked back to back for a reason. There's a lot of talent on this team, and you saw some glimpses on Friday, and they're only going to get better and more consistent with those glimpses.
So that's a look at some of the top teams and how they fared in week 0 action. And now that shifts the scene to, okay, let's break down what the top 20 is looking like, guys, in our roundtable here. And starting off, Bill, in looking at some of the games that happen with the South Jersey teams and how South Jersey teams are littered all over our top 20 rankings, what does that mean to you, as well as some of the South Jersey mainstays are now bounced out of the rankings in Mainland and Millville?
Yeah, the mainland loss was kind of surprising, even though, I'd heard some concerns coming into the game, but, I thought that they had enough back from a team that had, went to the state final last year. They had 8 guys back on defense, 6 on offense, an all-state player, and Jake Blum, a 4-year starter quarterback, and John Francini. So to lose to Atlantic City, who we knew was talented, but, had lost Sonny DeGraffenwright, more commonly known as Ice Cup, to lose Peaky Roseboro, their 2 best players. We thought that they would be the team that would maybe kind of have to get their feet wet a little bit going into the season. So that was surprising. Millville, lost to Rancocas Valley. Millville plays Atlantic City this week, which is a very interesting game for me. I'm going to hold off judgment a little bit on them just because of how good RV is. And I think RV showed that in this game with just a dominating performance. Savion Adams, the quarterback who Coach Garrett Lucas feels is the best athlete in South Jersey. I mean, he had a play where he was dead to rights at the 15-yard line and made six guys miss and didn't even get touched. It was unbelievable. They have a couple pass rushers in David Ogunzola and Michael Beasley who each had a couple sacks. Beasley tipped a pass that Ogunzola intercepted. They're two of the better um, defensive linemen, I think, in the entire state. So I think when you look at from Millville's perspective, I think there's better days ahead. I think they did not look great, but I feel that was more of how good RV looked. Mainland, again, we'll have to see. I mean, that was a tough loss for them. And so like you said, they did get bounced out, but they're a well-coached team. They have some veterans who have been deep into the playoffs before. I would expect both of those teams to bounce back.
And Donovan, in our third broadcast of the opening weekends, I saw a thriller that came down to the final seconds in Essex County when it was Shabazz upsetting then 17th ranked West Orange in a game where I don't think a lot of people had on their bingo card Shabazz game-winning field goal. I don't know if that's ever happened in Shabazz history. What does that win do for that program and Coach Gaines, and say about the level of football, despite being a Group 2 school, knocking off Group 5 West Orange?
Shout out to Joseph Dallas, the only one to pick Shabazz to win that game of our crew. But it's a very, very exciting win in what could be a very, very exciting season for Shabazz. I mean, you mix in, you have Nasir Gaines as new head coach. He's a local Pop Warner legend. You mix in a new group of transfers that came in from schools like Bergen and Joe's and Passaic Tech, and then you have some talent coming back, especially on the defensive side. Then, like you said, it's a Group 2 upsetting a Group 5 in week 0. Like, that's a massive statement win for Shabazz going forward. And it's what a debut game for Basit Remy as well as the kicker. Moved from Ghana to Newark 2 years ago, quit soccer, became the kicker for Shabazz. It was his first ever football game on Saturday night, hits a 23-yarder to win to beat a ranked team. That's storybook stuff right there. That's fairy tale stuff right there. The only, can they keep this going? There's a lot of excitement surrounding this year's team. Like I said, everything they bring back. It's, they play St. Peter's in a few weeks, and then they play Kinnelon in a few weeks. So, this is a big game for them to schedule, and it's another big game for them to win. Can they just keep it going from here? But like I said, this is a statement win for them, and this is just good energy for them to keep going up and up from here in the following weeks against really good competition.
Ryan, the typical threesome of teams that we know as public school powers in the North, Old Tappan, Ramapo, Northern Highlands, they took care of their business all in week 0. Is there another team that's possibly lurking that could join that pack in your mind?
Yeah, I think that team is Pascack Valley, and I'll talk about them in a second. Start off with Old Tappan and Ramapo. They handle business. I'm not really surprised with those results. I mean, West Essex is a very good team, new coach, but still a very good team with a lot of talent there, and they handle business. And then Ramapo, you saw them against Irvington. I mean, that offense is as explosive as it was last year, maybe even more explosive. Then Northern Highlands, they come into our rankings. They come in at 19 after a win over Holy Spirit. An impressive effort, impressive 2A effort. Chase Calarco on both sides of the ball was dominant. 127 yards, touchdown. I believe he had 9 tackles on defense, a lot of solo tackles. Anytime you went to his side of the field, he was making a play, and he was making you pay. He was hitting you hard. A lot of pad crunching hits from him in what was the first game of the entire New Jersey football season on Thursday at the Battle at the Beach. And Jack O'Callahan, the quarterback, managed the game very well, looked poised. He kind of let plays develop and show that he's made a big jump from last year when he took over for Nate Johnson. And it was a physical effort, unlike last year, where they lost games to more physical teams, Union City being one of them, Phillipsburg being one of them. Although that was a great game, it was won on a field goal at the last second. But 2 teams that were more physical with them, and this time, Northern Highlands was the more physical team, against Holy Spirit. They last year, Nate Johnson and Matt Boydell in the game against Pascack Valley. They both got lost for the season, a couple plays apart. You can't really do anything about that, but that was a moment where, there's teams that are knocking around Northern Highlands here that are just, trying to tee off on them. And this year, I think Northern Highlands is going to be the team that's teeing off on people. And then, like I mentioned, Pascack Valley, they're not in our top 20, but they certainly made a good case. They ended Union City's 19-game winning streak at home on the rooftop, and they dominated everywhere but special teams. Union City ran 2 kicks back and didn't really do anything otherwise. Adam Shaw is the real deal at quarterback and this year at linebacker. Bill got the chance to see him last year against Rancocas Valley in the season's opening game. Stud dual threat quarterback. In this game, he had 16 carries, 132 yards, 3 touchdowns. He threw 9 passes, completed 5 of them for 144 yards and a touchdown. And then where he's going to Michigan State next year to play linebacker. That's where he started for the first time on Thursday. And he was a stud. 15 tackles, 10 solo, 3 tackles for loss, and he blocked 2 kicks. So he's going to be their Travis Hunter. He's not coming off the field, and that's going to be a problem for a lot of other teams. Kai Smith steps in for Kevin Regula. He's kind of the featured ball carrier this year. He's a DB turned, heavy contributor on offense, and he did his thing. So, Pascack Valley, a couple months ago, they had their coach step down, Lenny Cusimano. A lot of opinions out there about, who should be hired, who would be hired. And after beating the Group 5 runner-ups in, a 3-touchdown route on their home field, there's not a lot that people can say right now or do other than just tip their cap to Coach Bernier and the job he's done. And, I'm a little surprised at that outcome for Union City. They did lose a lot, but, they haven't gotten beat like that by a public in a long time. Usually it's just against St. Peter's, but this time, I don't know. With the exception of Toms River North, I haven't seen that in a while. And then Passaic Tech lost 40-6. That's another North Jersey outcome I was kind of surprised by. They don't have their quarterback, Gabe Miles. He has to sit due to transfer rules, but Union City and Passaic Tech, 2 kind of mainstays that didn't look too hot in week 0, but there's a lot of season to go. PCTI's got a big one against West Orange. I'm looking forward to that one.
So that's a rundown of week 0 action here in the Garden State. I'd like to thank Ryan Patti, Donovan Hugel, and Bill Evans for their time breaking down all those big matchups that we had, looking at how so many of our top 20 teams fared, and then giving a rundown of what was going on in the polls and what to expect in the week ahead already, week 1. So we're getting excited. For us, for NJ.com, we're going to be excited because we're bringing the sights and sounds of an NJIC football game. We're going to the Smurf Turf. We are going to Butler for the first time ever, and their beautiful blue field, Beckton at Butler on Friday night under the lights at 7 p.m. And then on Saturday, a great matchup in the Big Central, Phillipsburg taking on Westfield at 1 p.m. in that matchup. So make sure fans tune in, NJ.com/watch. NJ.com subscribers can watch the games live and on demand then at any time. And a reminder, fans, that from the opening kickoff to the end of the season, NJ.com's award-winning staff of reporters and photojournalists put you in the middle of the action. For in-depth coverage of all these games that we've been highlighting and other games around the state, including photo galleries, recaps, and stats, be sure to visit NJ.com/HS Sports. So that'll do it for episode 2 here of the Jersey Blitz. Again, thanks to Ryan Patti, Donovan Hugel, and Bill Evans. I'm Dan Long saying so long, and we'll see you next week here on the Jersey Blitz. Take care, everybody.
On offense, and he did his thing. So, Pascack Valley, a couple months ago, they had their coach step down, Lenny Cusimano. A lot of opinions out there about, who should be hired, who would be hired. And after beating the Group 5 runner-ups in, a 3-touchdown route on their home field, there's not a lot that people can say right now or do other than just tip their cap to Coach Bernier and the job he's done. And, I'm a little surprised at that outcome for Union City. They did lose a lot, but, they haven't gotten beat like that by a public in a long time. Usually it's just against St. Peter's, but this time, I don't know. With the exception of Toms River North, I haven't seen that in a while. And then Passaic Tech lost 40-6. That's another North Jersey outcome I was kind of surprised by. They don't have their quarterback, Gabe Miles. He has to sit due to transfer rules, but Union City and Passaic Tech, two kind of mainstays that didn't look too hot in week 0, but there's a lot of season to go. PCTI's got a big one against West Orange. I'm looking forward to that one.
So that's a rundown of week 0 action here in the Garden State. I'd like to thank Ryan Patti, Donovan Hugel, and Bill Evans for their time breaking down all those big matchups that we had, looking at how so many of our top 20 teams fared, and then giving a rundown of what was going on in the polls and what to expect in the week ahead already, week 1. So we're getting excited. For us, for NJ.com, we're going to be excited because we're bringing the sights and sounds of an NJIC football game. We're going to the Smurf Turf. We are going to Butler for the first time ever, and their beautiful blue field, Beckton at Butler on Friday night under the lights at 7 p.m. And then on Saturday, a great matchup in the Big Central, Phillipsburg taking on Westfield at 1 p.m. in that matchup. So make sure fans tune in, NJ.com/watch. NJ.com subscribers can watch the games live and on demand then at any time. And a reminder, fans, that from the opening kickoff to the end of the season, NJ.com's award-winning staff of reporters and photojournalists put you in the middle of the action. For in-depth coverage of all these games that we've been highlighting and other games around the state, including photo galleries, recaps, and stats, be sure to visit NJ.com/HS Sports. So that'll do it for episode 2 here of the Jersey Blitz. Again, thanks to Ryan Patti, Donovan Hugel, and Bill Evans. I'm Dan Long saying so long, and we'll see you next week here on the Jersey Blitz. Take care, everybody.